Hello everybody, this is ManuS and welcome to the next part of the MTG Arena set review for War of the Spark with the second half of the blue cards. Before we get started, you know the drill. Hit the subscribe button, turn on the notification icon if you haven't yet to not miss out on the rest of the series, and please consider whitelisting YouTube on your ad block to help support us content creators. And now on to the second half of the blue cards. Okay, so first we have Cleo's Dambreaker. Another proliferate card. It's a 6-cost 5/6 that when it enters the battlefield proliferates. Still not 100% easy, I think, to evaluate how good proliferate is gonna play out in the end, but my guess is it's at least fairly valuable, and I feel like a 6-cost 5/6 that proliferates is gonna be a decent card, at least with so many uncommon planeswalkers, a mass, and a couple of other fringe synergies. So all in all, well, this is almost certainly not a great card. I think it seems like at least a fine filler 6-drop. We often have these kind of 6-cost fatty Leviathans or Sea Serpents in blue in Limited, and they often end up being at least fine, and this seems like one of the more decent examples of those, would be my guess. So I wouldn't mind having one of these in my non-aggressive blue draft decks potentially, if I have enough things to proliferate on. Constructed, obviously not relevant. Next we have Lazotep Plating. It's a 2-mana instant, a mass 1, and you and permanents you control gain hexproof until end of turn. So basically it's kind of like a conditional trick slash counterspell that either starts amassing or just grows your zombie army a bit. Obviously you can use it to protect an already existing zombie army and growing it in the process. It seems like only decent, not that great, honestly. I think it is probably a bit worse than the common that costs the same and basically does the same, except it bounces as an effect instead of giving hexproof. So for an uncommon this is not that impressive, but at least in an amass deck with a bunch of amass synergy, it seems very serviceable. In constructed, even in an amass centric deck, if there will be one, I don't see this being good enough most likely. Next we have Naga Eternal, just your average 3-mana 3/2. As I already mentioned, this is kind of like the go-to baseline for limited formats these days, because it creates the most dynamic gameplay and replayability long term. And once again, here the hint, if you're interested in that kind of like game theory type stuff, check out Arelex's blog post on his blog about it, where he talks in detail about why this is such a good stat line and the ins and outs of this stat line over alternative stat lines like 3-mana 2/3s and 3-mana 3/3s. Next we have Nasod, Pater of Veils, another uncommon planeswalker. A fairly good one, I would argue. It's a double blue 1, so not that easily castable and splashable as some of the other 3-cost or 4-cost planeswalkers that we've seen. Each opponent can't draw more than 1 card each turn. Not that relevant in Limited most of the time, but still not terrible to have, I guess. In Constructed, this may make the card actually a bit more appealing. Once again, 5 loyalty and a -2 ability. And the -2 ability is actually quite nice. You look at the top 4 cards of your library and may reveal a non-creature, non-land card from it. So it's basically like lets you impulse twice, except that it only lets you get non-lands, and non-creatures impulse lets you get everything. But yeah, here it is attached to a planeswalker that has a decent ability and you can do it twice. So basically you get 2 cards out of this with a fairly high amount of card selection over 2 turns. Seems like a pretty solid card. Sure, you have to potentially protect it a bit, but especially on the play and with a 2-drop, that shouldn't be too hard. So yeah, I could see this making it into Constructed, one of the one of the uncommon planeswalkers that could have some Constructed implications, and maybe even in some older formats. And another one that benefits nicely from Proliferate here, because the static ability in Limited is not that valuable, so you rather just proliferate on it and use her a 3rd time and make her die that way rather than have her lying around with 1 loyalty for her static ability. Next we have her namesake card, Nasod's Reversal. It's actually kind of sweet. It's basically a remand that only works on instants or sorceries, but it lets you copy the spell instead of drawing a card. So for double blue, you get to basically fork the instant or sorcery, but instead of the opponent still resolving the copy, it gets returned to their hand, generating some nice tempo there. The problem is that it makes the card a bit inflexible in a way, because, for example, against the sweeper that you want to stop, you can't really do that with this card because you just cast your own copy. Because it's not obligatory, it's mandatory. It says copy target instant or sorcery spell, then return it to its owner's hand. The only obligatory part is you may choose new targets, but you have to play a copy, so it's kind of limited in its target. It is a reasonably powerful effect, and it could have some implications in Constructed, but it is a bit fringe, so I'm not sure how playable it's gonna end up in the end. Probably more of a sideboard card at best, and in Limited, I think it seems fine, like delaying a more expensive removal from your opponent while also copying it seems pretty good. So I think the first copy, and it's a rare, so you rarely will have more than one copy, will most likely make it in your deck if you're blue enough to support the cost. Next we have No Escape. It's the new take on Essence Scatter, basically. It costs 3, it can also counter planeswalkers, not just creatures, and you get Scry 1. In Limited, this seems like a very solid card. 3 is the difference between 2 and 3 from Essence Scatter to a cancel type effect is fairly big, so this is arguably in the same boat as cancel. Sure, it's a bit easier to cast and has Scry 1, but it's also much more limited, so I would put it on a similar power level as cancel, probably. Might be a bit better, but not a whole lot. So yeah, it seems more like the filler type card, and could even be that, depending on how the format plays out, that it could be worse because it's a bit too slow and reactive and clunky. But so far it seems like it will be fine in the format, but not great probably. But having an uncommon, sort of flexible uncommon common way to counter planeswalkers, stop them without them generating any value, is definitely valuable, making this a bit more desirable than normally, but yeah, still a bit clunky. Next we have Relentless Advance, basically your hill giant with marginal upside, the upside being that it is an amass-based hill giant, so it can grow, or if you already started amassing, it continues growing what you already have, and obviously having like a 4-4 or 5-5 is better than a 3-3 and a 1-1 or a 2-2, especially in Limited, so that's kind of the marginal upside here. Also it's a spell, so it works with some of the spell synergies. Seems like a very good common for Grixis colored Limited decks that have a bunch of amass cards. In Constructed, this is probably too weak to make it into any amass deck, really, because it just doesn't do enough for what it costs. It's a common after all. Next we have Rescue Sphinx. A 4-mana 3/2 flying, and when it enters the battlefield you can return a non-land permanent you control, and if you do, it gets a +1/+1 counter, so the Sphinx is either a 3/2 for 4 or a 4/3 for 4 that rescues one of your creatures, so it lets you rebuy an enter the battlefield effect or get rid of an enchantment like the enchantment that turns the creature into a 1/1 with no abilities from the first half of the series. So all in all, a pretty good uncommon flyer. Like 4-mana 3/2 flyers are decent and Limited, and the upside of generating some value and becoming a 4/3 make this a really good blue uncommon, all in all. Not a constructed card though. Next we have Silent Submersible, kind of a fresh take on our loot copter that got out of hand quite a bit. This one costs double blue, so it's pretty hard to support. It's a 2/3, no evasion. It also requires crew 2. And yeah, when it deals combat damage to a player or a planeswalker, so that's a nice addition here, makes it a bit more flexible, you get to draw a card. All in all, not too excited about this. It's not that easy to connect, even in limited. And crew 2 is quite a lot for a 2/3. Sure, you get to draw a card. The double blue is pretty restrictive. So yeah, seems like an okay card, especially in limited, but I'm not sure if this is remotely a consideration for constructed, and it just seems like a lot of hoops to jump through for what you get in the end, and it's just not that likely that you even get cards from this, given that it's a 2/3 with no evasion. But yeah, maybe I'm underrating it. I don't know, but it seems pretty underwhelming to me. In limited, it's a fine pick, though, but not a great one, since the double blue is still pretty restrictive and the lack of evasion is severely hurting. Next we have Sky Theater Strix. It's a 2-mana 1/2, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn. So it's just like an okay 2-drop flyer, especially in like the amass type decks that have a lot of spells. This seems a bit better. If you frequently can attack for 2, it's quite a good 2-drop. If you're more often attacking for 1, it's quite underwhelming as a 2-drop. So yeah, seems okay, depends a bit on the deck. Can be quite good or barely playable depending on your deck. Just a decent common, I guess, and not a constructed card, obviously. Next we have Spark Double, our latest clone variant. It's a 4-mana clone. You may have Spark Double enter the battlefield as a copy of a creature or planeswalker you control, except it enters with an additional +1/+1 counter on it if it's a creature, and with an additional loyalty counter on it if it's a planeswalker. And it isn't legendary if that permanent is legendary. So you can use this to copy legendaries and make non-legendary secondary copies, which is really nice. So that makes it quite a bit more flexible in a way. Because having 2 copies of a permanent that you normally couldn't can have some really powerful effects. And the fact that it makes the creature or the planeswalker a bit better makes up for the cost, especially when you're copying 3 or 4 cost stuff. So yeah, all in all, pretty nice clone. Seems really good in limited. Keep in mind it can only copy your own stuff, not the opposing stuff, which makes it quite a bunch more restricted. So you have to have enough good copy targets in your deck for it to be worth it. But if you do, it seems like a pretty strong card in limited. In constructed, there's a small chance that this has some use in constructed, but it's not very likely. These cards were really hit or miss in the past. We had phases where clones were played in standard, and we had phases where there were a couple and they were just barely playable or just completely unwanted. Next we have Spellkeeper Weird, another Horned Turtle. This one is a bit better than the Horned Turtles we talked about in white. It's a 3-mana 1/4, and for 2 and tap and sacrificing it, you get to return an instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand, which makes this pretty nice because you can just play it on turn 3, let it play defense for you until you don't need it anymore, and just return one of your best instants or sorceries back. So once again, nice synergy here with all the amass spells that generate bodies and have an effect. So basically you get some stats back after sacking this and get an effect out of it. Sort of win-win. So yeah, there are a bunch of nice spells, matter type things in blue here for limited. And this seems like a very solid common. Not constructed playable though. Next we have Stealth Mission. You put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature you control, and that creature can't be blocked this turn. So you can use it on your big zombie army, making it 2 bigger and hit the opponent hard, or you can just use it on any creature really. But it's basically kind of a more flexible amass that can't start a zombie army, but getting 2 counters on an already existing zombie army for 3 mana and letting you finish the opponent with unblockability can be nice. It's a bit situational and Yeah, it's a sorcery, it's not that cheap, so seems more like a filler to me in Limited, but not horrible. I could see having this as a filler in certain decks to just kind of end the game, or yeah, make a big unit that kind of stabilizes or can attack really well. But yeah, the kind of material you wanna avoid having in your deck, especially as multiples. Next we have Tamiyo's Epiphany. It's just Foresight with Tamiyo's name on it, which is, as we all full well know, is a super powerful card. For common card draw, you get to scry 4 and then draw 2 cards, so you get to dig up to 6 cards deep, and or make sure you draw 2 high impact cards if you find 2 good cards in the scry 4, and make sure you're not drawing land if you don't need it, or find land if you're absolutely looking for it, and so on. Yeah, Tamiyo's Epiphany, easily one of the best commons in blue in the set, almost certainly. And yeah, not much to say here. This card is real competition for Constructed even. Problem right now being that we have Chemist's Insight, which overall I think is still better, because first of all, it effectively is like a draw 4, discard 1, or rather a draw 4, discard 2, in a way. No, actually like a draw 4, discard 1. And over multiple turns, and it's an instant, so it's very flexible. You can use it whenever you have the opportunity, and like for example leave mana open. So I think while Chemist's Insight is still in the format, Tamiyo's Epiphany might be overshadowed, but once Chemist's Insight leaves at some point, Tamiyo's Epiphany seems like Constructed playable as well. Then we have Teferi's Time Twist. We have quite a bunch of like Planeswalker namesake cards in blue of Planeswalkers that are blue and another card. Teferi's Time Twist, no difference here. A bit underwhelming, kind of like a color shifted otherworldly journey. You exile target permanent you control, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. If it enters the battlefield as a creature, it enters with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. So I think Otherworldly Journey at least could target opposing creatures as well. So it's much less flexible here. This can target non-creature permanents as well to protect them, which is neat. But yeah, depending on when you have to save them, like if the opponent plays a removal in your end step and you have to use it, you can't, for example, block during the opponent's turn because it will only return at the end of their turn, and so on and so forth. So yeah, card doesn't seem great. Seems like an okay filler in Limited basically, but nothing more. Then we have Thunder Drake. That seems like a pretty strong common to me for Limited. 4 mana, 2/3 flying for 4 is a bit underpowered usually as a baseline, but not terrible. And usually they come with an upside which makes them, which defines how playable they are. For example, we had a 2/3 flying Vigilance with what's the word? I forgot the keyword. The keyword that puts a counter on a smaller creature. The Vigilance Flyer in Guilds of Ravnica, and that was quite a good card. And I think this is at a similar power level. Every time you cast a second spell each turn, you put a +1/+1 counter on Thunder Drake. And given that we have seen that blue is all about spells, that shouldn't be too hard. And as soon as this is a 3/4 flyer, 4/4, it's amazing, because it really dominates the sky against most things then. And if it ever becomes a 4/5, it's already way past common power level. So yeah, I think this is a pretty high quality common in blue. And in Constructed, obviously not relevant. Next we have Totally Lost. Fibblethip made it at the top, to the top of Nicol Bolas' head, or Nicol Bolas' statue. I think it's his statue, probably on his citadel. But yeah, cool artwork. Other than that, it's just the typical Totally Lost, including Fibblethip lost somewhere. Put target non-land permanent on top of its owner's library. Serviceable, underwhelming interaction in blue basically for Limited, and that's it. And last but not least, or kinder but least, we have a 1 mana 0/4 defender that scries for 1 when you play it. So if you desperately need some early defense in a very defensive blue deck in Limited, this seems very serviceable. The 4 toughness means that it can block almost all 2 and 3 drops and even some 4 drops maybe, making it a fairly good blocker, and the scry 1 is a nice added bonus. So yeah, if your deck is very defensive, this seems nice. Otherwise, probably not something you want in your deck, usually. Alright, this concludes the review of the second half of the blue cards. As usual, let me know in the comments what you think. If you have any suggestions on how to improve the series in the future, where you agree or disagree with my assessment of the cards, and so on and so forth. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification icon to not miss out on future content, share it with your friends, and please consider whitelisting YouTube on your adblock to help support the free content on here. That's it again for this time. I'm your host ManuS. I thank you for watching. I see you tomorrow with the black cards. Bye!